Hi, everybody. This is Arthi from Human Chapters. I'll tell you a little bit about human chapters. Humans are living narratives with a past, present, and future. These narratives constitute of a number of chapters across a lifespan. The aim of these conversations is to highlight a chapter of the narrative and unpack its connections to other chapters. I don't care whether people are natural storytellers, but I truly do believe each one of us has a worthy story to share. In acknowledgement to country, we acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet. We pay respect to their tribal elders past and present and emerging. We celebrate their continuing culture and we acknowledge the memory of their ancestors. Today, we welcome Tanya to Human Chapters, and Tanya is going to be talking to us about being a first generation Holocaust survivor. Um, Tanya, welcome to Human Chapters. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be on this program. As you said, I'm a first generation Holocaust survivor. My father was a child survivor of the Holocaust. He was about 8 years old when the war broke out. And as much as he didn't talk about his experiences until well into his 50s, so when I was in my 20s, I always knew one story that stuck with me, that when he was 8 years old, he was living in Germany and he was taken to the principal's office and told that he couldn't come back to school because he was Jewish. And it was 1938 or 1939. And he was growing up as a Jewish child, but in a very secular family. And he said, "What's Jewish?" So he didn't actually have a sense of his identity. Nonetheless, he couldn't go to school, and so his education was very, very stunted because of the events that followed. And he survived along with his nuclear family, father, mother, and sister, and they made their way to Australia, which is another part of the story. And he did educate himself. He was a remarkable man. He ended up writing 3 books about his life, just self-published, but he just wanted it documented for his family. And English was his 5th language. But the story has always stuck with me because of the lack of opportunity for education. And education has been extremely important to me. I think I was a natural student, probably would have been okay wherever I was going to school. And that was a different story for my one brother. But also I grew up with, I think, subliminal messaging that you have to go to school, you have to do well, you have to find a career where you can support yourself because the world is a very fragile place. So I found my way in various forms of how my life has taken me, that I always seem to be going back to university to study. I've now worked at a university for over 20 years. I'm an academic. I now teach in the School of Education at my university. My original background is in speech pathology, but a whole lot of events have meant that my career took a sidestep, and my focus is on literacy, education, educational policy, teacher capacity building, and we can talk about that a little bit more later, I guess. But I've just had this constant drive, which I think has really stemmed from my father's story. Certainly, as a survivor of the Holocaust and living such a disrupted childhood, you can only imagine that photos were very, very thin on the ground. And when he was writing his books, he did a bit of hunting around and found a few more. But the one photo that was always available to me was a photo of him on his first day of school, standing in beautiful outfit with braces, must have been the school uniform. And there's a name for it that's just escaped me, but his parents gave him it's like a long cone full of lollies, and that was the tradition that parents gave their children. So that was about 2 years before this episode happened. But my strong memories of him are always hovering around something to do with education.
Um, wow. What in I can't even begin to imagine what that would have been like for you, Tanya, as a child starting to understand the depth and breadth of this story and perhaps how you are also connected to it. Do you reckon we could unpack a little bit more about what it looked like when he needed to educate himself, if he ever talked about it, or if there are parts that you experienced? Yeah.
Okay. I don't recall. He certainly didn't go off and do any tertiary education or night school that I was aware of. Certainly when he arrived in Australia as a refugee, first in Fremantle, and then one thing led to another. He and his whole family landed up in Melbourne. He did training in trades, did electrical, not electrician, but some sort of electrical engineering training. So he certainly sought out various courses and things to do. He ended up running a business, and he wasn't a natural businessman. His inclination was that he should have been a professor of history. He had the most extraordinary knowledge. You could give him any period of time in any country, particularly European countries, and he would say, "Oh, well, that was when," and we get a whole story. Sometimes we had to say, "Dad, it's enough." But he was so he was an avid reader. And I think that's really what drove his education, and it really opened his mind and filled his mind. He came from a family of I guess they were quite socialist in their thinking and intellectuals. They were not religious family. So it was very much in his DNA, I think, and he was just starved of the opportunity. But he seemed to manage to find his way around that. And he was proud of me with, various educational achievements, but he was at pains to tell me to my face that he was proud. He would tell other people, my daughter XYZ, XYZ, but he could never tell me. He, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, he passed away about 10 weeks ago, and he still could never really acknowledge it. But I do know that it was there. I really do. I helped edit his books when he was writing them. That was an interesting process. I certainly read some content that's not appropriate for a daughter to be reading about their father's antics when they were teenagers, but he was willing to open up in that way that I certainly could assist with some of the editing, but it was hard for him to acknowledge. It was really hard for him to acknowledge openly. But I think that was very much, it wasn't just that with me. I think that was very much, it was hard for him to express anything directly about anything that felt intimate to him.
Sure. Um, let's talk a bit about his books. Tell us about some of the stories, yeah, anything that you would like to share anyway.
Probably like to focus mainly on the first book, which I think is by far the best and the most interesting. His story starts with his pre-war experience about the time that I shared with you, up until the liberation of the war. And the second book tracks what happens after liberation, getting to Australia, and the third book is about his life in Australia. So it's very much a chronology. When he was literally roaming the streets with his sister as an 8-year-old, and she was about a year and a half younger. They stayed in Germany, but then he had a very, very crafty, very determined mother. So my grandmother, she was the only grandparent that I knew. She survived. She managed to have her children, my father and his sister, my late aunt, hidden in Belgium in a convent. So there was about 12 children hidden in this convent by a woman who sounds like she put her life in incredible danger. She wasn't particularly warm to the children, according to my father's stories, but she put her life at risk and looked after 12 Jewish children that had all come from various parts of Europe. And because it was a convent, they all had to undergo a Catholic conversion. So my father's first book was called Saviours, Stories of a Jewish Altar Boy. And so he's got an image of him with the beautiful the clothing when he has his, the words just escaped me, the ceremony that Catholic children have.
Baptism?
No, it wasn't a baptism. It will come to me.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It starts with a C, I think.
Yeah.
Some listeners can be
Yeah.
saying, screaming at the radio, screaming at their phones now. But it's some pretty poignant stories about being, having to convert to Catholicism, including a name change as well. Post-war, he identified very much with his Jewishness, and certainly from a cultural perspective and a historical perspective, he identified very much with his Jewishness, but he was absolutely an atheist. He just couldn't believe that a higher being could let happen what happened. And he was a humanist. He came from a strong background of humanists. As I said, he didn't grow up in a religious family. So he was extremely interested in all religions and could tell us the most incredible stories, historical stories. He didn't remain Catholic. There's certainly some people hidden in similar circumstances chose to remain with the religion that they'd adopted. He chose to not be an observant religious person, but very much identified. And I was certainly brought up in a relatively secular way, but with lots of Jewish tradition as well.
That is so interesting. You know, Tanya, thinking about his journey, but then it gets me to think about your journey. And you mentioned subliminal messaging before. Tell us what it was like growing up with the threading or interweaving threads of education, interweaving threads of identity, that connection. What was that like for you?
It's much easier to reflect back on that as an adult, and I'm not so young anymore. What I was aware of growing up was that I felt my parents were fragile. My mother also had various types of trauma, very different, but she grew up in Australia, but lost both of her parents by very bad luck. So by 11, she was living with a stepmother because her mother had died in childbirth. And so they both had their trauma, which I imagine brought them together, and they were a very loyal couple until the end. My mother died a few years ago, and my father died just recently. So I always had a sense that my parents were fragile, and that if I did anything wrong, was naughty at school or didn't do well or was argued back or anything else along those lines, that they would crumble. I think that's underestimating. They've both been incredibly resilient with the things that they've had to deal with. I suspect that they would have been more resilient than I would be if I had to face the trauma and the tragedy and the loss that they had. But I had a very strong sense that I had to be just good, not in an outstanding way, but just in a compliant way. And I played the part beautifully. I think to that end, I missed out on some fun. That I was easy. I was a very easy child because I just did the right things. I really don't think I've had my adolescent rebellion in any great way. And that was very much, I was very aware of what I perceived to be their fragility and their frailty. And I can't rock the boat because they might just crumble.
Wow. So then, education as a cornerstone.
Mm, mm,
Tell us a bit about perhaps the strength, the solidity, um, just that sort of safety
mm,
that provided for you and how that has sort of unfolded for you even into the future until now.
mm. You used the word safety, and that, to me, that's the perfect word. I think it was a safety net. It was the one thing that I knew would really please them. They weren't that interested in my sport. I was, I was quite a musician, and they were interested in that. But it was really just about school, and it was about making sure that I could look after myself because, as I mentioned, both of them had trauma that is very unexpected, and they had both of them had no family, no infrastructure, essentially, for different reasons. So I just had the messaging that you need to just study, you need to get, be able to support yourself. And in fact, I had grand visions of doing medicine and psychiatry. That was all I wanted to do when I was growing up. And my parents didn't influence me a whole lot in terms of decisions I made, but my mother talked me out of it. And I think that she was a bit terrified of how long it would take me to get all of the, get the ticket. I remember her saying something like, "Oh, you'll be 30 by the time you can work. And what if you want to have children?" And she gave me this whole scenario, and I listened. I was so passive, and I just listened, which I is a regret at one level. But I chose to study speech pathology, and it has been the most wonderful career that's given me incredible opportunities. So I feel ambivalent about how annoyed I am or how regretful I feel. I do feel regretful. I should let it be known that I ended up marrying a psychiatrist. So somehow it kind of worked in a sort of perverse way. That's just an aside. But I look back now, and again, I didn't have that ability to just say, no, this is really what I want to do. I was just compliant. So speech pathology was very good to me, and in many ways, it aligns so closely with education because it's about, in my first area of work was in rehabilitation, so working with people who'd had acquired brain injury. And then I went back to study and ended up working with children who had cochlear implants in the very early days of, this was in the 90s, and became an academic, first in speech pathology and now in education. So I feel like I'm immersing myself in the safety of education, as well as really feeling, I think I get enormous reward out of, I can almost feel a visceral response when I can see students learning, processing, and getting that amazing start in their lives that can really shape their future, particularly at the university I work at, which prides itself on being a university for first in family to go to get tertiary education. And whilst not all students fit that profile, it's really education. The university is very much educating people, in that category. So I feel really privileged by the opportunities that my chosen career has given me. I had to work hard, as we all do. Things just didn't fall my way, but I kept on finding I was going back to education. I went back to university 3 times, to undergraduate degree, master's degree, PhD, and then I was working in a university, and it's where I will finish my career. I just feel, I think walking into a library is one of my greatest joys in the world. I just feel calm being surrounded by books and paper. And I know libraries are becoming less used in the physical sense these days, and that saddens me at one level, but I'm an ebook and e-reader person as much as the next person, but I've always had this sense of home when I'm in a library.
It's so interesting to hear your experience of being in a library and it being your safe haven. And I think about my experience, and Tanya, I was daunted by the vastness of knowledge in a library, and it almost became a hole that could consume me. And it's so interesting to hear about different experiences. But sorry, that was just my sidetrack thinking. I would love to understand two things. The first one, you said one of the subliminal messaging was go get an education, and education will help support you. I would love to unpack some of the nuances of what does that mean? Education will support you, help you to access life. That's my addition to it. And part two is what got you to choose speech pathology?
Okay.
By that, yeah.
They probably merge together, I think, in how I want to approach that. In many ways, my parents were both denied opportunities for education. My mother had to leave school early. Again, it's another story. So they both never went to university. So probably didn't really ever understand what universities were about at one level, even though they were both read widely. They both loved the arts and so forth, but they really didn't get what it was like at university. So when I say the subliminal messaging was get an education, it was more get a vocation. education. So if I'd come home and said, I think I want to do an arts degree, I think I don't know what they would have said, but it was not really that was not the messaging I felt I was receiving. It was get something that's going to be able to, you can go and work anywhere, you can look after yourself. So it was probably more about a vocational focused education. So I spent, I was a diligent student and went to work and so forth. But I then became aware that I didn't feel as knowledgeable and worldly because I hadn't really studied. It was it was a great program. This is my undergraduate degree, but there was no breadth subjects. There were no electives. Where it was taught at that time was like a little college. It really wasn't a university experience either. It was all the allied health, physio and podiatry and so forth. So it didn't really feel like a university experience. And my learning was very much to focus on getting through to get my ticket to go and practice. So I then, started to, read more widely about life, about things, about the books that people were talking about. I went back and studied, did an MA, Master of Arts. So I think that was my real education. I'm good at kind of doing what you have to do to get to the end point. And I did that, and I've always been able to do that. But I think it's really been the opening of my mind, reading well outside my areas of knowledge and comfort, studying applied linguistics and at the MA, and just thinking more widely. So that's become very, very important to me. I encourage my children who have all finished university to go and study a breadth type of course first. And I think that that's a reaction to my own experiences. Then doing my PhD, which is now, I was awarded my PhD about 15 years ago, no more. Yes, no, about 15 years ago. Again, it was focused as any PhD is, but I just learned so much about myself and about the process of taking on this one big, enormous ball in the air that I was juggling rather than the multiple things, which I'm probably more suited to, juggling little things and putting out spot fires and so forth. But the ability to just swim in the information and the data that I was collecting and thinking about the implications I think my PhD was one of my most joyful experiences. And I remember feeling quite a lot of grief when it finished.
As always, I have so many more questions for you.
I didn't answer the speech pathology career, but it was, I guess, language. I loved languages. I guess that's another thing that I identified very closely with my father. He was, like many Europeans, certainly growing up, was born in the late 20s, and with his experiences, he was so multilingual, but that was not unusual. But I loved learning languages. I loved lots of the things that I think are actually good prerequisites to be a successful speech pathologist. And it was sort of my second choice after medicine, which, as you know, didn't happen.
Yeah. You said thinking more widely is important to you. What do you mean by thinking more widely, and why is it important to you and just, I think, for everybody?
Mm. I can't say if it's important to everybody. I feel like I couldn't speak on behalf of other people, but I feel like the sort of narrow direction that I was channeled into, I felt I was channeled into about study, do well, go to university, get a career that you can, so forth. I felt that I was good at what I was trained to do, but I wasn't worldly. I didn't have enough knowledge about world politics. I didn't have enough knowledge about, but I've become very interested in the sort of social psychology, social issues and social equity. So just learning about the world a lot more. My school subjects I chose were all very sort of, math, science, languages. So I just hadn't found the groove, and it just seemed like something I wanted to do, wanted to engage more widely with people and not feel so sort of mono-focused, if that's a word, but just a little bit limited, I guess. Limited, yeah.
And the other question, bear with me, because the way I'll articulate it is probably not going to meet the intent. But that idea of learning, you said you didn't get your initial experience did not contain the breadth and depth that you wanted to have. What is good learning for you?
Mm. I want to just go back and clarify one aspect before I do answer that. I don't want to point fingers or blame parents, blame the course, my undergraduate studies. I could have done a whole lot more of just, didn't have to be as diligent. I didn't have to not take any time off and travel but they were all the subliminal messages. You just have to go forward, forward, forward. So I think that I just didn't have the confidence, the courage to just make other choices. So I really don't want to point fingers or blame anyone. Can you just repeat that second question again? Oh.
So yeah, so my question to you is what is good learning? Referencing your initial, you felt that there wasn't the breadth and depth in that first course that you'd done. But you also know what type of like that feeling you get when you have the knowledge or you want to learn more. Or so for you, what does good learning mean?
Um, what a fascinating question that's making me think really hard, and I don't want to waffle. So, um, what's coming to mind when you ask that question is I just want to continue being interested and open to ideas and not stay in an echo chamber. We can all get into echo chambers on social media platforms where we just hear our own thoughts echoed back at us. And even in my work, I work in an area that's quite contentious and polarized. I work in literacy education. So for the educators who are listening, you will no doubt know exactly what I'm talking about. And even then, I still try and find other voices just to stay open and interested. So I don't want to place any judgment on anyone else's. You should read the newspaper. It's important that you know about what's happening in this part of the world. That's certainly not what I'm thinking. It's important to me, and I found such pleasure and enrichment, not a should. It's just, and it become something that just I feel like it's just the way I want to continue to grow as a person. Just that I remain interested and curious. Curious is probably the best word. And I can't be curious about everything because our brain and our time just doesn't allow it. But just to maintain my curiosity, which I think I'd suppressed a lot as a younger person in my mission to just be that compliant child that I was describing. And I could have just stopped for a moment and caught my breath and thought, this is all very heading in, and people can't see me, but I keep doing my like channeling energy. But so it's probably just a reaction to just I know how it's I was focused. I became the influences around me was such with my temperament that I just played that good girl. And I don't think I'm doing anything wrong, but it's just I just want to open my mind. I challenged my parents on a lot of the views that I'd been imbued with about the world, political views in particular, and we never really resolved them. But they respected my right to think differently and have whole different values about certain things. But I didn't have that, or I didn't find that voice in me as a younger person.
Mhm. At this very moment, as you're saying that, Tanya, I said something at the very start of this recording when I talked about human chapters, that connection of this present chapter to the past chapters and to the potential future chapters, and everything that you're saying in what is good learning really is within that connection.
Mm.
So interesting. Thank you so much for being so courageous to answer that question, because those kinds of open questions, there's never right or wrong. It's, it just is what
Mm.
it is. So thank you. The other question I'd love to ask you is your PhD. Now, tell me what it was about and what you learned about yourself
Mhm.
through that.
My PhD, for context again, for anyone listening who is immersed in literacy education, I started in 2006. So it was a very contentious time in the way that what the so-called reading wars were at, very polarized. It's probably a little bit less, well, it's less polarized now, but that was the context. My PhD was this very open-ended, qualitative, interview-based study, or interviews and some observations. And I just wanted to talk to anyone at primary schools about what happens if you have a child who's not reading well or not progressing with reading. So I spoke to anyone who put their hand up. So teachers and specialist teachers, principals, speech pathologists, and the like, and just tried to, so what happens? How do you know? What do you do? And I compared that with what the evidence tells us should happen for these children. And I also spoke to the parents as well. That was an incredibly moving part of my PhD. So I looked at it, I looked at the issue of young children not reading at the with the proficiency that their peers were, and the attitudes and values and beliefs from the educators' perspectives, and the experiences of parents. So I had a mountain of data. I think in total there were about 38 interviews, which is big, but they were in different kind of the leaders and the parents and then the class. I sort of had to divide it up just so I could think it all through and then intertwine it. But I felt like, again, that was a really big opportunity for me just to swim in data and to challenge the dominant views about reading. So reading instruction, I'm sorry. Yes, so that was probably the start of me really finding my voice of saying I have an opinion that might not be the same as yours or yours or yours, but it's the same as yours. So it was really an important time for me to start really finding my voice. What I learned about myself, I learned about trusting myself a lot through great support. I had a bit of a dream run with supervision. So I know that's not the case for everyone, and it's really influenced the way that I now supervise students, research students that I work with. So I learned to trust myself. That's an ongoing journey because it continues to be probably one of my Achilles heels, but it was an important step. And I just learned that I could manage a big project. It feels, when I used to think about PhD, I think, oh, hard, I could never do that. But then it was, as I said, one of the most joyful times of my life. I learned that to do a PhD, if anyone is thinking about doing a PhD, it does take a village. Not just what the infrastructure is at the university, but supports around me. Had to be the right time in my family as well, and really did take a village. And I learned to be, I think, a much more efficient communicator because we talk about the elevator pitch, that you've got to say what you're doing in a short amount of time. At that time, there wasn't the structure. Some listeners may know of the 3-minute thesis competition. So I think Australasian competition. I might be wrong there, but ultimately somebody wins from a university in Australasia doing a 3-minute stand up of their thesis. I don't think I would have won at all, even at my university level, but I did learn to become a much more efficient communicator, knowing that I was describing my work to people who were very informed about what I was doing, to people who were interested but really didn't have any skin in the game in terms of my area of study, or what it means to do a PhD. So I think my ability to just tune in to listeners' needs improved as well. Gosh, nice to talk about it because it's been a long time.
Oh, that is wonderful. Talk us through what happened next after your PhD, what opportunities and into the work that you're actually doing now.
I think it took a few years for me to just again really take advantage of what I'd done. A PhD is the start of the journey rather than the end of the journey. I did come to that realization just as I was finishing. It really opens doors at the sort of, entry level into research. And I was already working at my university, and when I went back, I was a full-time student, PhD student, so I was maintained about a day work a week, but it was just little bits. So I came back into my role and got deeply involved in the things that have to happen, such as curriculum refresh and so forth. So got very immersed and didn't really capitalize on what I'd gained for a few years. And then chance happened that a colleague that I sort of interacted with over the years was on a pretty similar trajectory in terms of having a background in speech pathology, but becoming very, very interested and very driven to make sure that all children learn to read proficiently. And we are nowhere near that, still nowhere near that. She came to La Trobe and we formed an alliance and have ended up working together. We both came from other parts of the university to work together and have set up a lab, and it's been incredibly fruitful. But it did took me a few years, just because I walked back into my old job and got caught up doing what I'd done pre-PhD, which was very much focused on the teaching aspect, which was really important, and it was fulfilling and rewarding. But I didn't really capitalize on the research opportunities and the skills that I'd gained for some time after. And I think that was just a matter of circumstance. It wasn't anything good or bad. It just was. But I'm really grateful that we formed an alliance in about 2015, I think, and have just worked together, and it's just been a wonderful snowball effect.
Tell us about that alliance and Solar's journey.
Well, it was the SOLAR lab that we set up.
Yes.
So SOLAR stands for the Science of Language and Reading. We set that up in 2020 when we both ended up by chance again in the School of Education, coming from our different backgrounds. The Solar Lab is not a physical structure. Occasionally I get requests to come ask me, people ask, can I come and visit? It's virtual. My colleague, I'll just say her name is Pam Snow. People may know her, and I know she's been on this podcast. We live about 150 kilometres away from each other. I think people think we just live next to or with each other. I'm not sure, but so it's always been virtual. We were doing Zoom 3 times a day years before we had to pivot because of COVID pandemic. So it is a virtual platform that we started, and we were very keen to have the concept of language, as in oral language, in our the title, because our construct is very much around the fact that reading and writing, but reading is a language-based skill, and we both have expertise in language as from our background. I also have a degree in applied linguistics. So it was going to be a platform to do a number of things, including research, and that's been successful and fruitful, and continues on to do advocacy work. And we've worked with various sectors at various levels of government, and we talk to smaller groups as well, but advocating for a shift in the way that we all approach reading instruction. We run short courses so that we can work with anyone who's interested. They're open to anyone. They're non-award courses, so anyone can do them. They're 4 or 5 week for an hour and a half a week, that structure. So we've got 3 different courses. It's been going for 5 years now, and we've had well over 12,000 people take one or more of our courses. So they've been really rewarding and exciting. We've also been able to set up a language and literacy stream in the Master of Education. So for those who want to get more than just a non-award, but want something as an award degree. And we've been able to have input into the way that our pre-service teachers are taught about teaching literacy, which is now actually a federal government requirement. The federal government is now requiring that universities have to meet certain requirements about the core content. And so we were working on that with lots of other colleagues as well, particularly focused on science of learning, not just the science of reading. But we were really putting those things into place well before the government's, what's called the Strong Beginnings Report. So that's probably a fairly good summary. We've now got small, hopefully growing, but a lovely team. So it's not just the two of us. We've got some excellent people. Again, I know that some of them have been on your podcast, and we've been able to engage with some of our former students in the Master of Education, have come and done research assistant projects with us, come and taught in the courses at the School of Education. So it just seems to be, it's just been an incredibly rewarding experience. Something we knew we had good ideas. We knew that our position was very much the same, and we were very much driven by evidence, not because what we thought, but we were very much driven by evidence and wanted to really infiltrate into thinking in education about evidence-based practice, particularly in the context of the poor reading proficiency rates that we have here in a country that does value education. There is a problem. But we didn't really think it would take off in the way that it did. For example, the short course, we worked with our marketing team, and they did their own marketing analysis, and they said, well, you need 30 people to break even to enroll. And so we thought we'd aim high, and we aimed for, let's go for 50. Let's hope we get 50. This was our very first short course, and we had 880 enrollments.
Wow.
So there's a thirst and a need, so we were really, it was validating to know that we were really meeting a need of not everyone, but, it was a proportion of people that were really interested to learn and understand more about the process of reading, how language fits into that process, and how to, explicit instruction and all we know about cognitive science. It was admittedly during COVID. We started the lab in May 2020. So that was, we were all in the depths of COVID, and we were in Victoria, which was incredibly locked down. But we opened it up nationally, and we even get international people. So I think in that time, we were all just doing anything at webinars. And so we really were lucky that was the time when people were just at home, and everyone was engaging in all sorts of things. But it has continued, and it's been just a very enriching experience. Once again, that's where I need to get out of my bubble, because I, get great feedback, and we hear how schools have implemented changes as a result, but then go out into the real world and there's still resistance. There's still people that hold very different views. So I'm not under any illusions that our job is done. Our job will never be done in our work life. We know that there's a lot more work to do.
Absolutely. And thinking about the world and the state and the fluid nature of it constantly changing, to, I suppose, for us to be able to plant seeds. And you guys have done such an incredible job. And it's so wonderful to be able to, like when I talk to people, Australia is one of the leading lights in so many respects in education. I suppose the bar it's setting as well in what needs to be credited, or just how things are taking shape at the moment. So thank you very much.
Oh, I think it's a very lovely comment, but I honestly and will absolutely, with no hesitation, say I'm a small cog in a great wheel of people doing fantastic work.
Absolutely. And it takes a village, literally, for a lot of impactful stuff. So it starts small, it starts with one person, but then there's a village surrounding it. Yeah. So thank you. Tanya, what's your aspiration going forward in whatever part of your life you'd like to talk about?
Uh, I've got lots of energy, still got lots of energy for work. I'd like to see the Strong Beginnings report implemented in terms of the way that universities are training the next round of teachers, and the small part that I can play at the one university, I'm absolutely honoured to play. What gets me up every morning is the fact that we've got still about 1 in 3 children who aren't reading proficiently. And that as we know, the evidence tells us when children have a slower start. They fall behind in their early years. There's a far greater risk they'll never catch up without a lot of input and support. And we often just don't have the resources to do that. So that really is what gets me up every morning, this will to be part of this movement of just ensuring that everything is done to make sure that we get 90 to 95% of children across the literacy into the literacy space with proficiency, so that only a small percentage of students who really genuinely need additional support, the resources are going to be there. We can't support 1 in 3 children. It's just we don't economically, from human capacity, we just don't have that ability. I love the research that I do. I've got a couple of major projects through some funding that we were awarded, looking at coaching, impact of coaching in schools, and impact of various types of professional development. So I'm very motivated by that. Again, back to my father, I'm probably at my happiest when I'm at my desk writing. Sometimes it's hard to carve out that time. Slowly getting better at it. So I have lots of energy for work, even though I'm certainly coming to the twilight years in my working life. I've recently become a grandma that I shared with you, but really recently. So I just want to make sure that I enjoy that as much as I possibly can, which I know I will. I'm not concerned about that, but it just adds a very different dimension to my life. Other aspirations, just remain curious and interested in people and what goes on around me, and just stay open. My father ended up with dementia, and that was pretty confronting to see from a man who inhaled the newspaper, watched every news service he possibly could, and as I said before, he could talk about any point in history. He'd be able to fill us in, often with way too much information. I don't want to be like that, but I really did see suddenly the deep sadness that we all felt around him. I don't think he was as aware as we were, but when I could see that he wasn't able to get pleasure out of the things that really drove him, and his other passion was food. He loved food. He starved at different times in his earlier years, so he ate anything and everything, but he really did love food. And I just, if I've learned anything from my father, and it probably took me till my 40s to understand why he got up every morning, and it was just so he was so lucky, felt blessed to be alive and blessed to eat any morsel of food. When I was younger, I used to think that he was just silly and couldn't be discerning about anything, but he just lived every moment as if it was going to be his last. And I know that's a cliche, but he really did. And it's taken me a long time to appreciate that, but I do really appreciate that, and hope that I can live my life and be that model to my family, my children, my students, not to get closed off and set in my ways.
Thank you so much, Tanya. It's been so wonderful sharing this chapter journey, multi-chapter journey, and for you to be able to share it openly. It's absolutely such a wonderful honor. Tanya, as we do wrap up, has there been anything that I haven't asked you, or something you've wanted to share that hasn't come up?
Archie, I think you've done the most wonderful interview.
Oh,
So I don't have anything else that I feel has been left out. So thank you so much for your interest.
oh, you are so welcome. And for everybody that's listening to this conversation, you know what? Human chapters is complex, and it goes through so many different threads. I start off with one chapter or one theme, but it's never one theme. It's always a multi-themed conversation. So please do share it with anyone that's wanting to listen, that's interested. And like Tanya said, be interested, be curious. If that's your cup of tea, please share it. It's going to be available on Human Chapters YouTube channel, Human Chapters podcast, and Human Chapters Facebook page. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for listening.
Welcome.